two very dynamic individuals, as I mentioned. Captain Brian Schiff, a veteran captain of a major U.S. airline, more than 20,000 hours of flying. He is an active flight instructor as well as his job with the airline, and he's got a wide-ranging general aviation experience. He has a single-engine airplane that he flies and gives instruction in, and he gives instruction in lots of other airplanes as well as being left seat for a commercial airline. And Brian is also a board member for the National Association of Flight Instructors. He's been with us for several years, and thank you, Brian, for your service to NAFI and all of those of us who are members of. And also we have Mr. Mark King. Mark is a master aerobatic instructor, and he's got a number of thousands of hours of flying. 3,000 of his hours are devoted to emergency maneuver training, or UPRT, and you'll find out in a little bit that stands for upset and recovery training. It'll be part and parcel of what we hear tonight. He's got a lot of experience in tailwheel and in aerobatics, of course. He's provided training for a number of clients to include federal, state, and county agencies. And he has also taught UPRT, upset recovery training, and aerobatics in Europe as well as the United States. So these two fine gentlemen are going to make the presentation tonight on understanding stalls and spins. We're delighted to have you both. Thank you, gentlemen. Brian, I'm going to pass it over to you. You have the stick and the throttle. Don't forget to use the rudders.
Thanks, Ron. It's great to be back on MentorLIVE, especially, I'm honored to be on the 50th episode. That's really, really neat. And as you're talking about our sponsor, ASA, that reminds me I need to purchase another, my FAR AIM for next year. So I'll be doing that right afterwards. With regard to our topic tonight, stalls and spins, I considered myself fairly proficient with and stalls, albeit maybe, and spins, but maybe out of currency with the spins. And until I met Mark, and I received some advanced spin training from him, and so profound was what I experienced with Mark that I asked him, I said, would you mind teaching on one of these MentorLIVEs with us? Because I think what you have to offer is valuable. I learned quite a bit, and no matter how many hours I have, and of course he didn't care how many hours I had when I came to him for my tailwheel checkout at CP Aviation in Santa Paula. Really, the more time that I had was more time since my primary training that he, bad habits he had to clean up. So tonight we're going to discuss some of the untaught and more advanced aspects of stalls and spins. Welcome to MentorLIVE, Mark.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here, and I'm really honored, Brian, to be part of the 50th episode, and appreciate the invitation to be here.
Absolutely. You have a lot to offer. I'm looking forward to discussing this stuff with you tonight.
Great. Yeah, and we've Brian and I've had a lot of fun in the airplane together, and also on the ground. We managed to get his son a private pilot certificate over the summer, and we had a great time doing that. Great time back at Oshkosh, and we've had a lot of fun. But let's see what we can uncover about this topic that seems to be a mystery to a lot of people. And Brian asked me, he said, could you do your dog and pony show? So, here we are with the dog and the pony.
So here we are. I've sat in on some of the ground that he's given other people, and every time I listen to you, I've learned something more. So take it away.
All right, I appreciate that. How about that next slide? So one of the things that started me getting very passionate about this topic, of course, is working full-time as an upset recovery instructor or emergency maneuver training, which is what we called it before that. That's the original term that Rich Stoll came up with when he created the syllabus for this, and the FAA has kind of changed the name to UPRT purely because I think they like four-letter acronyms more than anything else. But I'm a very active general aviation pilot in a lot of different genres, and I get a lot of magazines in my mailbox every month. And seems like in one or more of these publications, and of course we see it with internet forums and blogs and discussion groups, I would see an analysis of a stall spin accident, or I learned about flying from that, something to do with a spin or an incipient spin. And so much of the information was just inaccurate. And I set out to kind of, through this presentation and the teaching I do, to kind of set the record straight on what's really happening with the airplane when it stalls, when it spins, and to try to beat down some of the fears. I do a little bit of primary instruction here and there, and I was just flying with a gal today that had an unfounded fear of stalls. She didn't want to do any, and I decided, well, let's not do any stalls. We'll do some boundary layer separation exercises and see how that goes. And
it's all in the name, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all in the name. And she says, what's that noise? And I said, oh, I'm really not sure. And then we stalled the airplane and recovered it without a big production. And she says, was that a stall? And I said, it most certainly was. And she says, well, what's the big deal about that? You know? So we made a little progress there.
Most of my students, when they first see the stall, I'm like, that's it. That's all it really is to it. Exactly.
Yeah. And of course it can go mild to wild, but really it's just not a big deal. And I started researching the Wright brothers and their experience with stalls, and I got into some reading of Orville's writings in 1909. And I didn't realize until I really dug into this that the first flight, or the first attempt, on December the 14th was actually the first stall spin accident. And Orville had written that Wilbur underestimated the power of the elevator and stalled out. And that was the first reference I could find for the word stall. I dug into it a little bit further. There's a book out there called The Bishop's Boys, and was written by Tom Crouch, who happens to be the curator for the National Air and Space Museum. And I contacted him and said, what's the origin of the word stall? And he says, I really don't know. Dug into it a little bit further, Oxford English Dictionary and a few other things. And the term stall really means failure to proceed. You've stopped forward motion. You put your car in a parking stall. You use a restroom stall. You buy strawberries in a market stall. And so I got to thinking about the word and why it is that it just gets so misconstrued. But anyway, let's move on from that. And let's talk about a stall. I think we all know, and most of us are flight instructors here, that when we exceed the critical angle of attack, we lose the boundary layer. The airplane experiences an aerodynamic stall. And how do we cure that? We cure that with a reduction in angle of attack. We've exceeded that critical angle of attack. What I think a lot of us don't realize is the wing can stall at any speed and at any attitude. And I look here, somebody's moving my airfoil around a little bit. But a lot of times I fly with a lot of professional pilots. As Ron pointed out, I fly with a lot of government agency and law enforcement personnel that are high time experienced pilots. And oddly enough, I think, Brian, you sent me a link this morning of a video to watch from one of the YouTube celebrity flight instructors. And the recovery from the stall, and what I see with a lot of these professional pilots, is the first thing they do is add power.
Yeah, and when I was first looking at, I added these extra slides and rotated the images because we're always presented a stall in the books and our textbooks and the images of a level flight attitude. But it can happen in any attitude. It's just a matter of asking the air to turn too sharply around the wing. Just like, you know, we run track on a rounded corner track. If you had a square racetrack and you tried to make a sharp corner, you too would tumble and fall. And instead of air separating from the wing, it would be the runner separating from the track. So we're a little bit misled by this attitude that we always see in these pictures.
Yeah, it's always straight ahead. And there's really not a discussion about the relative wind, which we're going to get into in a minute when we talk about how a spin actually starts. But understanding the relative wind and where it's coming from, and when we really stall an airplane, we're moving the wing away from its relative wind or its flight path quicker than the relative wind can react to it. It's kind of a different way to look at it, but that's actually what's happening.
Right.
So here we've got what causes the airplane to spin. And I think in a lot of our promotional materials for this seminar, you had asked me to come up with something. And I said, well, what I wanted to lead off talking about is I do a lot of CFI spin endorsements, and I ask the question of the CFI applicant, what causes the airplane to spin? And the standard answer is one wing stalled more than another. Great, that's accurate. Here's the problem. They can't tell me how we get there. How do we stall one wing more than another? Brian, you got any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, there are a lot of books that tell us what happens, and we've got the outer wing moving faster, the inner wing and all that. But if you're flying along and one wing is dropping, they're changing the angle of attack is from what I understand of the total angle of attack. And I know that you taught me about the yaw and roll being coupled, and so I'd like to hear your explanation of that again.
Yeah, and I get this, and this, Rich Stoll, when he wrote most of this material, coined the term coupling. And yaw and roll couple rolls off of my tongue all the time. And I'm kind of doing a disservice because a lot of people don't understand what that is. So when we use the term coupling, I'm referring to a disturbance along one axis of flight affecting another. So if we're flying along straight and level, for example, and I don't know how well you can see my model here, we're straight and level, and let's say we apply some left rudder. Well, the nose is going to yaw to the left, but that excess yaw is going to affect the roll axis, and the airplane is going to roll off on its left wing. When that happens, the relative wind, the localized relative wind for that wing is coming in from the bottom. We have a much higher angle of attack on the inside wing than we do on the outside wing. Since the nose dropped as soon as we coupled yaw and roll, we then typically pull back on the elevator to raise the nose. That's going to stall this wing first. That wing stalls, the outside wing accelerates, relative winds coming from here. This wing, the outside wing is still creating lift, and that's the onset of auto rotation. And now we're in a spin.
And I kind of think of the coupling as like when I'm folding a chart. Remember when we used to use paper charts, or looking at my iPad, I should say, doing something with my hands, but yet I would keep the airplane wings level with my feet on the rudder pedal because yaw and roll are coupled. I can use the rudders to keep the wings level.
Right, and the yaw axis can affect the roll axis can affect the yaw axis. It goes both ways. And this is typically the skidded condition or uncoordinated flight. Now we dig into, and I haven't seen the new flight instructor ACS yet. I don't know if it's out, but on the commercial pilot ACS, it talks about cross-controlled stalls, and I really don't know what a cross-controlled stall really is. I'm not sure by definition. I don't.
A lot of definitions out there.
Yeah. There's, you know, is that a slip? Is that a stall and a slip? I don't know, you know. But, right. And if we look at this slide here, we can see the two different arrows, or the relative wind changes as we couple yaw and roll. Let's watch a video on an accelerated stall. My point here being that accidental stalls and spins don't occur in these check ride or training configurations that we find ourselves in. You know, we look at, wow, let's go out and do some power off approach to landing stalls, an important training maneuver, but that is a procedure. It's not really a stall recovery. Stall recovery is part of that procedure, but that's what we're teaching, for example, for the private check ride. And let's take a look at this accelerated stall video, and let's see what happens with this airplane when we just happen to do a reduction in angle of attack. This is going to be a single, it's a accelerated stall. It's a steep turn, 60 degrees angle of bank approximately, in a Cirrus SR22. And we're going to see the nose buffet. And all I do here is relax the back pressure and continue with the turn. I don't know, is it stalled? I didn't see it yet.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah. It kind of dropped a little bit. The control wheel, or the side stick as it is in a Cirrus, is kind of like the angle of attack controller. The more you're pulling, the more angle of attack you've got. I used to put a piece of tape on the shaft of a control wheel from a Cessna, and we'd test out the critical angle of attack, and you had, the further out that tape was from the panel, the greater your angle of attack.
Yeah. And I've seen so many people overreact to an accelerated stall that they think, oh, they got to get the wings level, and if we don't have power in there, let's get some in there and shove the nose down and all this. And just, if we watch that video, we're just relaxing the back pressure, reducing that angle of attack just enough to get the wing flying again.
Right. And if I play it one more time, we can watch it as we come around. You'll see it. I'll jump ahead. And it looks like a fairly coordinated turn. That must have been you flying there, Mark. And right there, I'm seeing it bobble.
I had the yaw down on.
Yeah. And so you feel that accelerated stall. Yeah, all you got to do is quit pulling, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. And the airplane recovered and continued with the turn. I think if we look at some of the maneuvering flight accidents, overreacting to a stall recovery like this is what leads to getting into a spin, getting into a stall that the instructor or the pilot can't manage.
And the
number one, because they haven't seen it before, so they don't know how to react to it. They don't know what the proper recovery technique is.
Right.
So
when it catches you off guard, the natural tendency is to pull.
Exactly.
And not release the back pressure.
Yeah.
And this one's accelerated because it happens while you're turning. And acceleration is a change of direction or velocity, or change of velocity, which is direction or magnitude. So if we look at the math on that turn, a 60-degree bank, like you were saying, is 2 Gs, right? And we're not going to do too much more math after this, right? Because this will give me a headache.
Well, yeah. If we've got a level turn at 60 degrees angle of bank is a 2G load. It doesn't matter what airplane it is.
Right. So what does it do?
Yeah, the square root of 2 is 1.41. So whatever the stall speed is for a given configuration, or whatever the stall speed is that day, remembering that our stall speeds in the book are all based on gross weight in a standard day. I have yet to fly on a standard day. I don't know about you. And I haven't gone out and done a lot of maneuvering flight at gross weight. But
I bet we have more of them in California than most of the rest of the country, but it's very rare. I think you said what's the standard day, and your students are supposed to say not today. Not today.
Yeah, that's kind of my standard answer.
Yeah,
not
so
today. But that stall speed is going to go up by the square root of the G load.
Right. So if you have a 50 knot stall speed, that's going to go up to 71 knots in a 2G turn.
Correct. And that can surprise some people.
Right. Right.
Okay.
So how do we get the spins from stalls?
Well, we've got yaw and roll coupled, and we just talked about that, but yaw and roll combined at a stall is going to be a spin. A spin is an uncoordinated stall. It's as simple as that.
Right.
And we have a picture of a turn coordinator here. And I'm reading a thing here off to the side that Loretta just put up, and I got distracted there for a second. But we had a photograph of a turn coordinator, and naturally the ball's centered here. I don't get to see that very often. When I flying with Brian, I didn't see it in the back. It centered except when we were in the run-up area.
Right.
The ball is only accurate in unaccelerated flight. What's unaccelerated flight? Unaccelerated flight can be a steady 2G turn, for example, like the one we just saw in the Cirrus. But the ball is not going to be accurate at the beginning of the turn or coming out of the turn. But it is accurate, and use it as a gauge to determine what you can already feel. You know, we should be able to feel that we're uncoordinated, and we can validate that by looking at the ball. All
right. And I saw a question pop up that said, explain how the relative wind changes with a wing that's dropping. And basically, if you have an airplane with no airspeed, pardon the 727, but I happen to have it sitting here, and you just roll, you have a 90-degree angle of attack, right? It's just the wind is coming from this direction as you drop the wing. Now you combine that with forward movement. So the wing that's dropping, you have to add that component of movement. So the wing that's dropping has a greater angle of attack than the wing that's going up. So if you combine the two motions, that of the aircraft through the air and that of the wing dropping, and you add the two vectors of those two motions, you get a greater angle of attack. Am I explaining that correctly? How the drop, the wing that's lowering has a greater angle of attack.
That's it, because it's moving down. Even if we go back to, and we have a video of it on our resources page, and as many times as I've taken your dad's articles to task, there's a video on here where he says exactly that same thing. That is, I think, 40 years old.
Right, and it was just as valid then as it is now. And at the end of this webinar, or the Mentor Live, we'll have a link, a URL that shows you, and also in the resources on the right side where you get to the quiz and everything else, there will be a link to where these resources. So anything we mention in the broadcast tonight will be available on that website as well. So
to your point, with that rolling moment on there, that wing is at a much higher angle of attack. Back to what I was showing you with the model, it's going to stall first. The outboard wing is going to accelerate, and that's the onset of auto rotation. Right. Recovery from a spin, how do we get out of this mess? Okay, the first thing we want to do is reduce the power, don't add it. Oftentimes I see professional pilots, honestly, my better spin students, Brian, are lower time pilots without a lot of experience. I have a lot of theories on why that is. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but a lot of times I see the guy that knows what he's doing add power, or the pilot that knows what they're doing, they add power because they hear a stall warning horn, or they feel they know the airplane's stalled, so they're going to add power, first step of their recovery, instead of reducing angle of attack. So let's get the power out if we're in auto rotation. The ailerons absolutely have to be neutral. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And then full opposite rudder. And what are we doing when we apply the opposite rudder?
I'm guessing this is decoupling the flight controls?
Correct. Now, there'll be some arguments here, and a lot of times I hear, well, the rudder stops the rotation. It does not. In the incipient phase of the spin, which could be, if we talk about FAA certification, they talk about, in Part 23 aircraft certification, the incipient phase of the spin being between 1 and 3 turns. For our purposes, and particularly for instructors teaching, the incipient phase needs to be 1/8 of a turn, or 45 degrees of heading change, which is likely going to result in 45 degrees angle of bank while you're stalled. Right. Is going to return the wings to equal angles of attack, and then relaxing the back stick is going to unstall the airplane. But this is really before auto rotation starts up. So the pair recovery we want to do when we have auto rotation. Power to idle, ailerons neutral. The rudder, opposite rudder, then is going to set the airplane up or decouple yaw and roll, so that our next step, elevator forward, is going to break the stall and stop the rotation.
Now, like a good soldier and a good student, I'd always practice stalls and spin recovery exactly using this technique, and it became natural. What I had not ever done is to do these out of order. And when I flew with you, I was really impressed, and folks, you're going to see some videos coming up here of what happens if you don't do these in the right order, or if you exacerbate, or if you what's the word I'm looking for? Mess up the spin. You aggravate the spin by doing these either out of order or applying incorrect flight control input. And so I was really astonished by this, and I had never seen it like this, and it's a bit of an eye opener. So also remember that your aircraft may have a different procedure. Like I looked up the Piper Warrior. These are a little bit different order. The several aircraft that I've flown have a different procedure for spin recovery, and that's as a result of the flight test pilots coming up with the best way to get that aircraft out of a spin.
And yes, I would fundamentally agree with that. And you know, my favorite is the Beechcraft products, and they talk about all this stuff in the beginning on how to recover from a spin. And at the end, they say, and of course, at all times throughout the recovery, the throttle is closed and the ailerons are neutral. You'll see a lot of cases where it says control column full forward. There's a lot of airplanes out there that don't have as much down elevator authority as they do up. These are also airplanes that are not certified for spins. You know, the things that we have in the inventory right now are particularly Cessna 172s, 150s, 152s, and Citabrias. And I'm sure somebody's going to pop up with a list and a question bank of everything else that's certified for spins. But really, the airplanes that are being used for the CFI spin endorsement are pretty much these. You know,
right.
And I guess the statute of limitations might be out on this. I got into an inverted spin in a Mooney once at the top of a chandelle, and it did require full elevator forward to recover. And I was a little bit surprised at that, because one of the things we teach in upset recovery is just move the control column forward or the control stick until the stall's broken or the rotation stops. Because you
had to keep moving.
Yeah, if you give it too much, it can tuck under and go over on its back, and then you'll temporarily unstall it. And because it'll stall at any attitude, you'll end up in a spin going in the opposite direction while you're inverted, and that's kind of something that is a little bit difficult to deal with.
Yeah, that would be tough to deal with. Well, let's take a look at some of the most common times when you can get into a spin, some scenarios, and let's look at some aggravated spins. If you put the wrong flight control input in, you've taken some great videos to show this. And so what have we got here first?
Great, and I do want to acknowledge our crash test dummy here, which is a retired Alaska State Trooper. He was active at the time. I shot these videos a couple of years ago. And here's, this is going to be a 1G unaccelerated spin where we do the pair recovery.
And this is in a decathlon?
Yeah, I think it's a decathlon, if I remember right.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, now, full rudder and pull. That's it. Full rudder, pull it. There's your spin. Okay. All right, opposite rudder. A little bit of forward stick. And we recovered. Neutral rudder, pull it level.
Just your garden variety spin there, right?
Right, yep. Do them every day. And that was a one turn. And what we do when we go out and do the spins in our class, or the material that I teach, we do 1 and 2 turn spins in the beginning, and we recover on heading for a variety of reasons. And we do a lot of these. We typically would do 12 or 15 1 and 2 turn spins, some to the left, some to the right, because we're trying to build muscle memory where you have an automatic response to an outside stimulus, because you really don't have time to think about this when this happens for real. The second thing is calibrating your brain to comprehend the information your eye is sending it. And we add the challenge of recovering on heading, which is really easy to do, and it's a Citabria or decathlon.
Yeah, you showed me how to do that, and I was surprised. And it really brought my situational awareness out to another level. trying to do that as well, recovering on that heading.
And in competition aerobatics, we do 1 1/4 spins, we do 1 1/2, 1 3/4, where you're actually judged on your accuracy of the outbound heading. Kind of interesting.
So here we got a video view it from the outside, and it's slowed down to 1/4 speed. You want to talk us through this as it's going?
Yeah, this was we were shooting some various promotional videos for the Figure One Foundation, and I did this spin to show. Really, it's a 3-axis entry because we've got yaw and roll couple, and we add the stall. And I think here we can really see the rudder input and how the full rudder input is affecting the roll. So to begin this spin, we were in 1G unaccelerated flight, throttle closed, got down to about 70 miles an hour, which is a good speed for a decathlon, and gave it full left rudder. We'll see the airplane roll off to the left. As soon as it starts to roll, we add the stall. Let's take a look.
So watch the flight controls. The rudder first. The rudder first. So I saw all rudder and no aileron in there.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And so
that was, you know, and that's a great example of how powerful the yaw axis is when it influences the roll axis.
Right.
So what are we going to do here?
Brian and Mark, Ron.
Yeah.
So we're about halfway, a little over halfway through the broadcast, and it looks like we're halfway through the slide deck. So you're on track. We have a number of questions that come in, and if you want to just keep going with the presentation, I'll try and sift through the questions and pose them to you near the end of the broadcast, if that works for you.
Great.
Sounds good. We'll look for them at the end, and we'll answer.
I can trim up a little bit of what I'm going to talk about towards the end, so we have more time for the questions. All right, let's do a spin and add some power. Let's see what happens here. If we're spinning to the right and add power, and I think we have a slide a little bit later on, it's going to show the spin axis. If we're spinning to the right, the nose is going to drop and become closer to the spin axis, and the spin is going to accelerate. We jokingly like to say that engine RPM equals spin RPM. We can control the rate of rotation with the throttle. The other thing that's interesting about this, if we're spinning to the left, the nose will typically rise and the airplane will move away from the spin axis, flattening the spin. Flat spin, bad. And we're gonna talk about flat spins. We've got a slide to look at because these are often unrecoverable, particularly in general aviation airplanes. So let's take a look and see what happens when we add power.
So this is adding power at the wrong time during the spin, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And we're going to go around, we're going to start off with an unaccelerated spin, and we're going to go around one turn.
Okay.
And add power.
What do we got on the altimeter? 3,400
And I
climbing.
think we can
Okay,
get a
perfect.
good
Let's
view
just
of the
level out right
acceleration.
here. All right. I'm going to have you put us into a right-hand spin. Okay. I'm going to add some power. Okay. We're going to see what happens. All right. So just like we were, you want me to come all the way back to idle? Come all the way back to idle. Okay. All right. When you're ready, wings are level, level pitch attitude. Okay. Let's go full right rudder. Pull the stick back. There's our spin. Going to go around one turn. I'm going to add some power. There we go. Let's recover. Okay, get the power off. Opposite rudder. Neutral. All right, up through the horizon. And I'll add power.
I'm fairly sure I saw it speed up there.
Yeah. And we lost probably 1,500 feet in that.
And so we don't add power too early.
Right. And if the power's in, let's get it out.
Right.
You know,
right. And
first step.
And an aggravated spin with aileron. This is trying to roll out of the spin with aileron. Is that right? And which may
roll out or entering a spin with aileron in. So if we apply aileron into the spin, again, we're going to move closer to the spin axis. This is going to reduce the radius of rotation and increase the rate of rotation. And these things are rather compelling because they're accelerated, but you don't have the sound of the engine. If we go out spin aileron, we're going to move away from the spin axis and again flattening the spin. That's the thing that we don't want to do.
Wow. Okay, let's watch this one and let's see if we can see what happens when the aileron is put in.
I'd like you to give us a spin to the left, and I'm going to add some aileron. Okay? So I'm going to come back to idle, level flight. I'll kick full left, rudder, pull back, and all stay light enough that you can do what you need to on the aileron and hopefully not fight you here. Okay, all right, so let's put us in a left spin. There we go. We break off. We've got one rotation. I'm going to add some aileron. Now recover. Okay. Power's at idle. Aileron's neutral and full right rudder. There she comes. Neutralize my rudders. And climb it back up. Coming through the horizon. That one accelerated pretty good.
Impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of fun. And I think that was a right-hand spin with in-spin aileron. I really couldn't see which direction we were going, but that, or a left-hand spin.
It was left,
with
yeah.
aileron into the spin, yeah. So here we've got some a view of the relative wind coming from the bottom and the shielding that can occur on the elevator, or actually on the rudder, shielded by the horizontal stabilizer in the elevator, where it's not going to capture any air and the rudder is rendered ineffective by a flat spin.
Wow.
So yeah, if the nose is up, we need it down, we need airflow over the rudder. T-tail airplanes, this is really not a problem. I've never spun a T-tail airplane. I've had an opportunity to spin a Tomahawk, and I declined that based on some other research that I did.
Interesting.
But we can see the effect of shielding here. I actually want to point at the screen, so I'm not going to do that.
I found what was most impressive to me was this, trying to release the elevator or ease off on the back pressure to recover from a stall while you're still in a spin. And what this
this is compelling, and we're very adamant about, during the pair recovery, finish each step before you start the next one. The biggest one is getting forward elevator ahead of the rudder, or not actually decoupling or applying opposite rudder at all and just going forward elevator. And again, I see this with higher time pilots that they know they're stalled. They want to get the nose down. Let's take a look and see what happens here.
Yeah.
And really what this does, it takes the weight of the engine, and the way, the engine's seeking the center of the earth. And now we're just going to take it and point the engine right at the center of the earth. And this is the same effect as an ice skater that brings their arms in and really starts to rotate.
Pirouette, I think is what they call that.
Pirouette maneuver, yeah.
Makes sense. All right, yeah, watch this and pay attention to the rate of rotation.
Okay, Brett, what we're going to do on this spin is I'm going to add some elevator. Okay, we're going to go forward elevator after about one turn of a right-hand spin. We're going to accelerate it. Then, after I give it the forward elevator, before you recover, I'm going to bring the stick all the way back. Okay? This is going to kind of solidify that we're back into that developed phase of the spin and why the steps are in the order that they're in. Okay. All right, when you're ready, let's do a right spin. Okay, right spin. I'm ready. It's clear. All right, right rudder. Pick back. Great. Here we are. All right. Here's a little bit of forward elevator. Look at it accelerate. Oh, bring the stick back. Now recover. Okay. Neutral. Good job. Power at idle. Up through the horizon. Power's coming in.
I remember doing this with you, Mark, and if that had happened to me inadvertently, without you in the airplane, and this is just me doing a spin, and I screw up the recovery, and I saw it spinning. It was so impressive that I think I'd be going over my conversation at the pearly gates on the way down, because I'd probably just lock up. It was so compelling and overwhelming that I learned a very valuable lesson on that.
The other important thing to remember about the elevator is once we accelerate it to that rate, and when we do this in the training, we actually bring the stick all the way back for a couple of reasons. But when we move the stick back, nothing happens because the spin's now in a state that we call inertia lock.
Wow, that would be fun.
And then, but if you, as soon as you apply opposite rudder, bring the stick forward again, it stops immediately.
Right. So that stresses the importance of not releasing the back pressure until you get that opposite rudder in. That's the takeaway.
Yeah.
So
and even if the book says bring the control column full forward, number one, make sure you have opposite rudder first. And number two, it might not be full forward on whatever day you're happening and where your CG is. You're just going to bring it forward till the rotation stops.
Right.
All right.
Right. And so another time that this can happen is if you're doing it possibly happen if you're doing a VX climb, and especially I think you said in something with a lot of power where you'd be required to have a lot of right rudder, and then the engine all of a sudden quits, and there you are back there close to a stall to begin with. And there you are with all this unnecessary right rudder while you're in a stall because of the loss of thrust. If you don't get that nose down and release that right rudder pressure, that's what happens here, right?
Right. And remember that how we used to define slow flight was any further increase in angle of attack or reduction in engine power would result in immediate stall. So let's think about that. And then a higher horsepower airplane, we have a lot of right rudder in there to keep this left turn coordinated. And we lose some engine power, or we just simply want to level the wings to stop the turn without unloading the airplane. It's going to stall, and with that rudder, that excess right rudder in there, it's going to spin.
And this is an eye opener as well. And I remember doing this with you. And this can be something that can happen if you're not right on top of your game with the flight controls. But also, it kind of lends to what I've been teaching is maybe we shouldn't plan on doing a VX climb out of an airport, like, oh, I'm just going to plan to climb out at VX, and that's okay for me to go into that airport. Well, if you need to do that, then maybe you shouldn't be going to that airport, and that's just a technique.
Right. And I think another thing that I hear out of I don't want to throw individuals under the bus, but we probably have a couple DPEs on, and we probably have some 141 flight instructors, and I hear things like VX to 500 feet. VX to 200 feet, VX to some arbitrary number, which is probably okay in a 172, but we get into higher horsepower singles. VX on a Bonanza, for example, is 76 knots. Best glide is 105. That's a pretty big push.
Right.
So
let's take a look.
Let's take a look at this.
Let's start a climbing left-hand turn. Let's use 60 for kind of a VX. Okay, climbing left turn. I don't see anybody over there. Yeah. Coming through 3-5 right now. Good. All right, that feels good. Is the ball centered? The ball is centered. Okay. It's centered now, I guess is what you're saying. Yeah, it's right there in the ballpark. All right, there's a partial power loss, and there we go. Okay. Let's get power to idle, ailerons neutral, opposite rudder, and recover. All right, let's pull the nose back up to the rise and add some power. Happy, happy.
So if you're not on your game, that can happen pretty quick.
Yeah, it'll wake you up.
And we had a sample video of that that you shared with me.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at a VX climb in this. What was this? What kind of airplane is this?
This is a Howard DGA-15. It's a 450 horsepower airplane, but it is got an empty weight of close to 3,000 pounds. So the wing loading on this is about the same as a Model 35 Bonanza. Both of these airplanes are about 20 pounds per square foot on wing loading, which is typical for a higher horsepower single engine airplane.
So this is something that can happen if you're doing a VX climb, which this aircraft was. I think the pilot admitted to that. You know that?
Yeah, it was a VX climb, and the idea here was to just show the short field and climb performance of this airplane. One of the fuel tank that was selected became unported, and we can hear the engine quit when the fuel unports. And he's trying to go for best glide, and let's just see what happens.
And that's awful. There just wasn't enough airspeed and altitude to lower the nose and get the speed back.
Correct. And I'd like to point out here that while the pilot did have some compressed vertebrae in his back, you know, he survived and was alive to talk about it. The airplane, oddly enough, started on fire and was completely down to nothing about less than a minute after that video was shot.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And notice the elevator
Yeah.
was given all, it was obviously in a stalled condition and doing all we could do at that point. He couldn't lower the nose.
Yeah, he tried to get the nose down and then tried to flare it a little bit, and that just obviously didn't happen.
Yeah, I don't like VX takeoffs. To me, VX is, you know, you got yourself into something you shouldn't have, and we're going to use that speed as an emergency to try and get as high as I can in the shortest period of time, because I'm concerned about clearing something.
Yeah, so clear the obstacle and accelerate.
Right, and so that was kind of a hard pull panic right there, just like something that can also get you into a spin by having a hard pull panic, an unintentional spin. Set this one up.
Okay. Yeah, and the hard pulls or the startle response is what the NTSB is calling it now. Any number of things can promote this. Well, let's take a look at what happens.
Okay, why don't you pitch us down to about 130 miles an hour? All right. All right, coming through 130 right there. Great. Okay, we're going to level it off, and we're just going to give it a pull. And we'll get up about right here and just break it off into a spin. Oh, boy. All right, can you recover that? There we go. All right, thank you.
Yeah, so another kind is like if you hit wake turbulence, right? And I think this was kind of a setup where the pilot, the student, the learner was unaware of what was about to happen, just like you would be if you hit a wake, right?
Yeah, I briefed this that, you know, we're going to do some unusual attitude spin entries, again, stressing that this stuff isn't going to happen typically at a 1G unaccelerated intentional spin entry. And if we hit wake turbulence, and I've done a little research on this by actually hitting some wake turbulence, and this is realistic to the roll starts, and instead of unloading the airplane and getting a rolling recovery going, which is a topic for another time, the pilot pulls, and the airplane's already set up for a spin. So let's run through that.
Okay.
Hey, we've seen the effects of aggravating the spin. We've looked at a couple of I don't know, unusual attitudes or ways to enter a spin, not necessarily normal. We talked about in the classroom a little bit of that wake turbulence deal. We don't really know what that might look like, except it might look something like this, okay? We might want to recover this at this point. There we go. Back to idle, ailerons neutral. There we go, and that was odd.
Wow. So that's, we've looked at only the tip of the iceberg of a lot of this spin stuff. And I know that you had mentioned earlier about the spin endorsement. Let's talk briefly about that.
Yeah, I do a lot of spin endorsements. I also work with a lot of flight instructors that have spin endorsements, and I kind of question what was really done to give them a spin endorsement. And I'm not an expert on spinning 172s. I've tried it. It doesn't interest me very much because it appears to be a lot of work with not very good results. But for those of us that are giving the spin endorsement, I don't see applicants or people that I'm working with, when we look at the highlighted section here, which talks about demonstrates instructional knowledge, I'm not seeing that. And, you know, gee, it'd be great if the FAA gave us a program or gave us some guidance where an instructor that gives a spin endorsement might have a little bit more knowledge and is able to export that to the student. I just see too many of these where it's done in a 172 with maybe an attempt at, or an incipient spin, one to the left, one to the right. They come back to the airport. They're so glad it's done. They write the endorsement and it's over with. I don't think the endorsement is taken seriously.
Right, and all the regs.
Yeah,
that pilot possessed instructional proficiency, but I think we're selling ourselves short in a lot of the spin training and what we're doing, and I think that's why we see so many stall spin accidents.
we do, and I had looked at the null report the other day, and I frankly have forgotten it, but there was still an impressive number of maneuvering flight accidents with a CFI on board.
Wow.
That's just not good.
Right.
How are we doing on time, Ron?
We're probably going to be just a little bit more than an hour, but there was an interesting question that came up that's appropriate to this spin endorsement. One of our viewers says, do you think we should require spins of private pilot candidates, those who are seeking a private pilot's license, rather than just have that limited to CFIs?
There's a lot of discussion, and if you go into airport coffee shops, you'll always overhear the conversation. Well, you know, back when I did it, we had to do spins, and that was required, and that's actually not true. The FAA never had spins required. The CAA had spins required for the commercial, and that ended in 1949. I don't have a good answer to this question. I think the private pilot students that I see go from zero to hero at our flight school end up taking the emergency maneuver or at least the first module of our spin course because they're exposed to it every time they come to a lesson because there's somebody else taking that kind of training. I don't know if that's a good answer.
Okay, well, that's good for today, and thank you, Mark. So you go ahead and continue if you would, please.
Sure.
So the last topic we're going to talk about was comparing a spin and a spiral.
Yeah, let's take a look at that really quick. And I can't see the chart, but I think I know the material well enough to kind of walk through it. A lot of people don't understand the difference between a spin and a spiral. If we get into the airplane flying handbook, they use the term graveyard spiral. When we get into the commercial ACS, we use the term spiraling descent as a maneuver. The graveyard spiral that we enter, and this is it's really a disorientation thing. The airplane typically drops off into a left descending turn. The pilot then sees the altimeter unwinding and the airspeed going up and the VSI going down. They might have a little bit of a misguided idea that pulling makes the airplane go up, and they start pulling, and that increases or decreases the radius of the turn, tightens the turn, accelerates it. The airspeed's going up, the altimeter continues to unwind, and they continue to pull. And there's a lot of G going on here, and the airspeed goes up into the yellow arc, and they continue to pull until they either hit the ground, they break, get a G-induced loss of consciousness, or fly themselves right into the structural failure on the airplane. The airplane's not stalled in a spiral. In a spin, it is. Therefore, the airspeed in a spin is practically zero because there's no forward motion. In a spiral, we're accelerating. Of course, we got high airspeed. The G in the spin is 1 because the airplane is stalled. In a spiral, it's at least 2, 2.5, going up depending on how hard the pilot pulls. But I think in the interest of time, let's kind of move forward instead of getting wrapped up in spirals.
And so if you're getting to recover from a spiral, the important thing is to unload the wing and roll wings level before you pull up, because think of your wing.
Correct. And thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
But the other thing is get the power out, because we've typically entered this from cruise flight. So let's close the throttle and then unload. An unloaded wing will not stall. An unloaded wing produces no adverse yaw. The ailerons are really effective. We can roll the airplane upright, and it's going to want to climb at that point.
Right. And there's a great video online that you recommended, and I think you said you have all your students watch the AOP Air Safety Institute, 178 seconds to live.
178 seconds to live, and it's some great data that was compiled by Ohio State University a number of years ago, but it's very accurate.
And there's a link to that video on the resources page, which can be found right here, and also on the resources tab of the MentorLIVE page as well. There's been the viral multi-engine video that we just saw of the skydiving King Air, and in the interest of time, I think we'll skip past that because that's more fun than it is educational. I think the bottom line is that that twins are not exempt from spins, right? They can still spin.
They can spin.
Yeah, clearly, and they want to do that. So who's doing this training that you're giving at CP?
Well, who's doing it or who's getting it?
Well, who's receiving the training is what, that's what we're talking about.
So at our school, CP Aviation in Santa Paula, quick little plug, we do a lot of government agencies. I don't know if it's appropriate to name them all or not. We might be able to identify one by the guy in the flight suit there. We do federal, state agencies. We do some other pilots from other areas that come in as an additional training. They get funded to do this. We get a lot of people that just want to get this kind of training. People from all walks of life. Most of our private students and commercial students at the school end up going through it only because they're exposed to it.
Right, and many CFI applicants are coming forward because they have to.
I do a lot of CFI spin endorsements. The school does a lot of CFI spin endorsements.
Well, I'd like to encourage anybody who has not received some formal upset training and spin training to go get it from a company like yours who gives it regularly and gives it.
There's us out here. There's Catherine's Ace Aerobatic School back in Tennessee, I think is where she is. Patty Wagstaff. Yeah, she's presenting next month. I'm actually looking forward to somebody with a PhD in math teaching performance charts. I can't wait for that.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Yeah.
I don't understand those charts myself most of the time. And Patty Wagstaff School down in Florida, APS in Arizona. There's a lot out there. Right.
And who influenced you to teach this stuff?
Oh gosh, it really started with Judy Phelps. If you read Rich's new book, new ebook called Learn to Turn, is out on the web, sponsored by Heart Soul, and I think Community Aviation. I had the honor of Rich asking me to write the foreword to that book. And that started with, the real story is in the foreword, but it comes down to this. I found myself with nothing to do, wanting to be a professional airport bum, and started working for Judy at CP Aviation, and she decided I was going to be her next upset recovery instructor, and it just kind of gelled from there. But she's been a big influence to me. Rich, of course, I've had a great relationship with for about the past 12, 15 years teaching this stuff. I've flown with Rich a little bit and consulted with him a lot. AJ Wilder, a close friend of mine and a member of the U.S. aerobatic team, keeps me going on my own pursuit of flying aerobatics. And God, there's a lot of people.
Well, I love the story that you wrote in the forward of you reading Rich's book, and I think you even said at one point you might have thrown it against the wall until you picked it up.
I did. I threw it across the room because, and if anybody in the audience doesn't believe that the elevator turns the plane, get this book and read it. And it just absolutely fascinated me, and that was after being a pilot for 30 years. You know,
right. It's a great book. I've read it as well. So I guess at this point, Ron, do we have questions for Mark?
Yes, sir, we do. Yes, sir. We do have a number of questions that I just want to go through a couple of them if I can. We're not going to get to all of them tonight. So if your question isn't answered, I just encourage you to look up Mark in California or Brian at when you see him at AirVenture or at Sun and Fun, and pose your questions again. But here's one from a glider pilot who says she routinely calculates the weight of both pilots when she's giving instruction to determine the stall airspeed. She wants to know, as she transitions to single engine powered planes, do power pilots calculate the same to determine their stall speed?
They can. I don't know that I've ever met anyone that does. I've done it. As I think our glider pilot could probably tell us that all of these speeds change about 2 knots for every 100 pounds we're under gross weight, if that answers the question.
And we know
Indeed,
the worst
that will help
at max gross weight, and then of course it's going to be slower if you're lighter. And generally in training aircraft, we look at the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
So another question, Mark, if the POH, Pilot Operating Handbook, prescribes a different action or different orders of actions, would you say still stick with the PARE recovery technique from a spin or go with the POH?
Unless this POH specifically says something like recovering from I go back to the POH for the Pitts S2B, for example, that recovery from inverted spins, apply aileron into the spin or into the direction of rotation, which helps it recover. Certainly true. For the most part, PAIR works. The airplanes where PAIR doesn't work are known. And I'd like to see a specific example where a POH really, at the end of the day, their wording is slightly different, but what they're really telling you is PAIR.
Okay.
And that's what most of my experience has been.
Okay.
And
thanks.
Anybody that I can be reached really easily through the CP Aviation website as well. If anybody wanted to take that a little bit further, I'd be happy to look at it and give my input.
And I'll put your email on the web page as well.
Yeah, great.
So we saw one external video of an airplane in a spin, and then several of them from the internal view. Are there other external videos available through some other resource than what we saw tonight?
Yeah,
so
if you go to Rich Stoll's website, I think he's got some aggravated spins and some DVDs that he has available. I don't know what's on YouTube. So I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah.
Just may not be right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Another question has to do with practicing power on stalls. Should we be more concerned with practicing power on stalls and possibly getting into a spin than power off stalls, would you say?
No, they're mishandled. They're going to end up with the same result. Yeah.
Okay, good. So one other question that came, or a couple other questions. During a spin, is the ball in the center?
I don't know.
You're too busy watching the world go around, huh?
What do you call us, Mark?
Where I'm sitting, I can't see the ball.
Oh, okay.
But I will tell you that the ball is not accurate for determining the direction of rotation. And is the ball in the center? No, it's moving around.
Now, the turn coordinator, you told me that it can be used to determine the direction of the spin, but not the ball.
Right. And I think between, there's enough male pattern baldness and gray hair between Ron, Brian, and myself that we know the difference between a turn needle and a turn coordinator.
Yes.
The old turn needles won't tell you anything. A turn coordinator will tell you the direction of rotation.
Very good.
And if there's any question about the direction of rotation, if you're looking outside, think of, the airplane is going against the flow. Step on the flow. You want to, if you're spinning left, the ground's going to be moving to the right. Step to the ground. The second thing is one rudder pedal is going to offer more resistance than another unless you're pressing both of them down really hard. Relax your feet, figure out which rudder pedal's offering resistance and step on that one.
I'm guessing the question was because if you're in the clouds, IFR or inadvertently in the clouds, if you're an IMC, how do you determine, which way you're spinning?
And you should have a turn coordinator if you're flying IMC. If you're flying a turn needle airplane IMC, I question your judgment on how you got there, but.
Okay. And Mark, one of our pilots is, one of our viewers is flying a Vans RV. Have you ever spun in a Vans RV and anything to add to his knowledge?
I will tell you the para recovery works in the RV. One of the things that the International Aerobatic Club did was actually take spins out of a couple of the lower category known sequences to encourage participation in RVs. I don't know if it's a problem with the airplane, because honestly, somebody says to me RV 3, 4, 5, 6, 12, whatever they are, I don't know the individual ones. The one I have spun is a 7, and it was really a non-event. It's standard entry and standard recovery.
Okay, great. One other resource that JD mentioned, and that's the Aerodynamics for Naval Aviators. That goes into spin characteristics. It's an excellent resource. So if it's not already in our resources page, that would be another resource for all of us pilots trying to learn more about stalls and spins.
And it is. And thanks to JD for bringing that up. And it has a lot of good information in there on the aggravating elements as well. I'd also like to recommend Rich's book, Emergency Maneuver Training, available on his website. It is a very easy read, and it actually starts with some very basic aerodynamics.
Okay, great. Well, Brian, Mark, we're pretty much out of time and beyond our time a little bit tonight. So I wanted to say thank you again for a most interesting presentation. We've all learned a lot from your experience and from your presentation, and the videos were all great. A couple of my takeaways are, as an instructor, I'm no longer going to call them stalls to my students. I'm going to call them boundary layer separation exercise. It sounds much nicer, and I'm going to try and prevent them going from mild to wild. So that's another good thing. And I am so glad to know that it was the Wright brothers who invented this stall. So that's another great takeaway. And then I've had to use PARE a time or two, P-A-R-E, and it's important we remember that we do it in that order, P-A-R-E, and don't mess up the order. So I think there's some great takeaways from others tonight. Yeah.
Finish each part before you go on to the next one.
Good. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Brian.
And absolute pleasure to be here.
Good. Yeah. Well, Mark, I'm thrilled to know that you're a fellow Bonanza pilot. That's great to know. But you know, Mark, you need a special title to recognize your aviation expertise and experience in stalls and spins. You know, one of our CFI colleagues that you've already mentioned from Idaho, he's known as the spin doctor. So I think, Mark, you need a title that is equally significant, you know, to set you apart from the other CFIs. Now, not to worry, Brian and I have talked about this, and we've come up with a title that's suitable for you. So hereafter, you're going to be known as Mark, the king of adverse yaw. How does that sound?
We're going to make that stick.
Great.
Everybody needs a title. Okay, thanks again,
Thank
gentlemen.
God it won't fit on a license plate.
Yeah. All right, thanks again, gentlemen. It's been a great presentation, and we've all learned a tremendous amount. For our viewers, here is the ending slide that you'll see, and on the right side on that banner, you can earn wings credit for participating in this presentation. Click on there, and in 2 clicks, you'll be at question number 1. Answer all the questions correctly, and you will get knowledge credits. And if you want additional resources to know more about tonight's speakers, or if you will give us a course evaluation, there are other places to click there. Thank you again, and if you're going to come back for another Mentor Live, which I hope you will, number 51, it'll be on December 15th, the 3rd Wednesday of the month, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and the topic will be If Performance Charts Could Speak, Lessons About Your Airplane, presented by Catherine Cavagnaro, good friend of ours, CFI, and the National Flight Instructor of the Year for 2020. She owns her own aerobatics school in Tennessee, and she is a great speaker. I've heard her speak on a number of times, and it'll be great. And then also I wanted to thank again ASA, our sponsor for tonight. They are a great sponsor, and there's a lot of great resources available there. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the 50th episode of Mentor Live. Please come back and see us again next month.